Hello everyone, you joined me today, I'm Max by the way, with How to Spec Guide, to talk about a topic that I think is super relevant for just about anyone interested in an electric car. Why are electric cars so expensive and where did all the cheap ones go? So when electric cars were first starting to become a mass market thing, we really have to credit vehicles like really the Nissan Leaf, which were honestly quite pioneering because they were small, they were cheap. Then we got later on, a few years later, right, the Tesla Model 3, when Tesla went from making luxury cars to a volume car. And while it was a lot more expensive, it was also a lot more capable. Then we got GM coming out with the Chevy Bolt. It seemed like we were going to get this exciting, affordable revolution of electric transportation in, car and SUV form. And here we are in 2023, and the average transaction price of any car, gas or electric, has gone way up. And a lot of electric cars are not only expensive, many of them, dealers are marking them up. They're getting price changes if they're being sold direct to consumer, just because of supply chains, various reasons. But in this video, I want to do two things. One, I want to briefly explain why this is happening. And two, I want to explain what you can do about it if you're looking for cheaper, more affordable electric transportation. What are still some good options you can look for in the market? So stay tuned and let's talk cheap EVs. The big elephant in the room for cheap electric cars is frankly just battery costs. With an electric car, you don't have to have an engine, right? So that eliminates some costs. Obviously, no gas tank. You eliminate a drivetrain for all-wheel drive. You usually have just a motor on each axle if you're going to make the car all-wheel drive. So while those rare earth magnets and some of those components to make the motors are expensive, and some of the other components in electric cars like heat pumps for climate can be pricey, really most of the cost comes from just the batteries. Right now, electric cars are pushing the limits of battery technology currently, right? Mostly nickel, magnesium, cobalt chemistries of lithium ion, basically variants of what you see in your smartphone or your laptop, but way, way more. You need like thousands of laptop batteries to have an electric car that can appreciably go anywhere, just because it turns out it takes a lot of energy to move thousands of pounds down the road. So when early electric cars came out, their proposition was having a smaller battery, smaller range, but one that would be livable as like a second car, city car, commuter vehicle for people. Think the Nissan Leaf, first generation. Nissan actually did market research where they looked up, I believe, like the average American drives 35 to 40 miles a day. And let's figure, hey, they might want to make some stops or round trip. Let's try to double that range. So they aimed for around 75 to 80 miles of real world range, which came to the market and it was sort of lampooned. People are like, oh my gosh, electric cars are so weak. But to be honest, the Nissan Leaf, when it came out, was a pioneering vehicle. Still, by the way, first gen Nissan Leafs, really great used buy. But people were like, come on. And then the Tesla Model S was coming out around the same time, I believe 2011, 2012. When that launched, it kind of showed that electric cars, mass production ones, could be sporty, they could be fast, they could have real highway range, and you could be used on the road trip. Tesla at this time was also building, of course, its revolutionary supercharging network, which they enjoy the advantage of now. So a lot of forward-thinking moves, and I think overall this was a positive for the EV industry in that it kind of showed consumers, it showed the world, right? Showed all of us that, hey, electric cars can actually be viable as like, let's say, a person's only car, maybe even a family's only car for road trips. The unfortunate reality is that came with a cost. Now, obviously, when the Model S came out, it was an expensive vehicle. Game-changing, no doubt, paradigm-shifting, but it was expensive. And I think this perception started to take hold as Tesla kind of took over the market. I'm not just blaming Tesla here, right? Someone had to be first. But as Tesla was on the bleeding edge, releasing super advanced electric cars, the perception became, hey, Tesla's the luxury brand, it's really expensive, and electric cars are expensive. And people started to get cold feet about it. But the reason that they became expensive is because we wanted electric cars to be more capable. In a world where we want electric cars to replace gas cars, to have a range with real world hundreds of miles of range, right? 200, 300 miles, to be able to DC fast charge in like 20 to 30 minutes and rapidly, replenish electrons at charging stations, to actually build that network out. All of this was going to cost lots of money. So there have been various government subsidies directed at Tesla in the US and other companies and the whole industry in charging. And, some of them have been mixed success. I would wager that the investment that the federal government did in the early years helping Tesla was pretty helpful, even if Elon Musk doesn't think so. But I won't get too political. But basically, right, there were some investments, but generally the consumers were footing the bill for more expensive electric vehicles. Then we had vehicles like Jaguar I-Pace, Audi e-tron. These were kind of luxury manufacturers' first attempts at making a high-range electric vehicle. Volume brands weren't really making electric cars to compete with Tesla in the mid-2010s. They were making vehicles more like compliance cars, is what we politely call them today. Vehicles that, to comply with the regulations of California mainly, but also federal government standards saying, hey, you should have more efficient vehicles. And to get some tax breaks, they figured, hey, let's make some cars in their fleet electric. So Volkswagen did things like take their Golf, right, really popular volume hatchback. They made an electric version, the e-Golf. Shared the same platform, but they, did some work to basically switch out the engine and gas tank for an electric drivetrain and find a way to store the batteries. This happened with the Fiat 500e, which, by the way, Fiat lost money on for a while. Compliance cars really didn't make manufacturers money because they were just starting to get into actually making cars with batteries and motors, these components, electric motors, I should say. And by using these components, because they were kind of relying on suppliers like Bosch or other suppliers, actually, believe it or not, Tesla supplied early EV batteries to several very early electric vehicles. They were paying a cost because when you're using a supplier, you're always paying a cost. And as the years went on, I think manufacturers, big volume brands like General Motors realized, hey, if we want to make mass market electric cars and make them profitable for us, we need two things. One, we need scale. And two, we need to actually take advantage of that scale and leverage it. We need to make a lot of our own stuff for the most important components. The same way, right, that like Honda or General Motors today are renowned for building great engines. They need to be known for making great batteries if they're going to make great electric cars. Otherwise, they're just taking other people's technology and reselling it, and it's hard for them to make a profit doing that. I mean, as much as I'm sure Tesla would love to, if they had the battery capacity to supply every EV manufacturer, other manufacturers wouldn't like it because they're giving money to a competitor or whatever. They want to make it for themselves. It's very important from a business case. So what this led to is GM actually in 2017 coming out with a revolutionary vehicle for the time, the Chevy Bolt. It didn't look very nice. I still honestly don't think it looks that great, but it was a hatchback, super practical. It had actually 230 miles of real world driving range, and it could DC fast charge, not very quickly, but it could. So it was really revolutionary. And then over time, over the years, the Chevy Bolt became one of our great recommendations for a cheap electric car. Lots of range. It really competed as a kind of a cheaper alternative to cars like Tesla's Model 3, which entered production as a volume sedan. The Model 3 has always been a great car, but it suffered from high prices until very recently. So here's where we get into consumer advice. If you want a cheap electric car now, new or used, but you want an electric car maybe as your only car, options are slim. Because if you want it to be your only car and you don't exclusively have a radius of a city, if you do, that's great. You can get, honestly, a cheap compliance car. But let's say you want a highway range electric car. Normally you would look to the used market for depreciation. So there has been a little bit of depreciation, not as much as you would want because of other broader economic factors. We had this whole pandemic thing, global supply issues, huge surge in demand for cars in general. So unfortunately, depreciation hasn't been the usual force for kind of trickle down that it can be. As a result, it's really only been until very recently that Tesla Model 3 has been affordable. Tesla Model 3 is a fantastic affordable EV. However, new ones, even now, with all the price drops that Tesla has done in the last few weeks, which have been significant, right? Because Tesla's facing demand issues, they're building up inventory, they need to sell more cars, so this is the logical next step for them. Really great for people who have that $40,000 plus budget. Yes, there's incentives you can take advantage of, but let's be frank, you need $40,000 to walk into a Tesla showroom and order a Model 3. Like it or not, to get a new one, you need more than $40,000, even a base Model 3. So new cars in general are just really expensive. Again, average transaction price for a car, right? $48,000, gas or electric, doesn't matter. Making a new car is incredibly expensive. So if you want a new car, well, it is the Chevy Bolt. Unfortunately, GM's cut production of the Bolt because they decided that fall of this year, I think September, they're going to make the last ones. And I've heard from a lot of people who've had experiences of dealerships where they've gone to look for a Bolt, right? Because might as well get it now. And dealers are telling them, sorry, all of our inventory, all of our allocations spoken for. We already have orders. So if you get lucky, if you're a really good bargain hunter, you can go on internet, go on websites, Autotempest, Cars.com, AutoTrader, look everywhere and find a Chevy Bolt, get in touch with a dealer, get your allocation, get a reservation. Congrats. Chevy Bolt is still a great car with the exception that it charges slowly. But hey, new for the price it is with all of its eligibility for tax incentives, really, really good. We're talking a sub $30,000 car that goes well over 240 miles at this point with a larger fixed battery pack. That's great. But Otherwise, I think you kind of have to go to the used market. You might say the Nissan Leaf is still in sale, Max. Yes, I really don't recommend you buy a new Nissan Leaf. It's using an obsolete charging standard called CHAdeMO for DC fast charging. We don't see a lot of those cables in the US anymore. The Leaf was a great car for its time, but Nissan has done very little to the actual innards of the car. They've made it nicer, more paint colors, more trim. There's the new, facelift, but honestly, a lot of that technology is really old at this point, and it's not a capable primary vehicle for people. So realistically, my option is, as much as I hate to say it, it sounds so basic, but really just look for used Tesla Model 3, or if you're in the crossover market, Tesla Model Y, because Tesla was a pioneer, and they were really early in delivering volume electric vehicles that were that capable. So Model 3 and Model Y, if you have a budget of $30,000, right, a little bit less than a new one, you can actually get a fairly good used Model 3 or Model Y. Tesla's official used inventory is a little more expensive than on the third party, but I do like that, you've got it's basically like a certified pre-owned vehicle. Tesla has I think, pretty good used warranty for their vehicles. I would feel good about that. It's a simple experience. You could also just find a used Tesla on a lot somewhere, any dealer, who's got in their hands on one. That always is an option. But yeah, Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model Y. There are two other new vehicles I want to mention. So the other pioneer in the legacy space, if Tesla has been the startup incumbent that has just revolutionized everything, I think in the legacy space, it's really been impressive to see the work that Hyundai Motor Group has done across their three brands, Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis. They've all done incredible things with electric vehicles. Let's just scratch Genesis right off here because we're talking about cheap cars. Genesis is a luxury brand under Hyundai. So Hyundai and Kia have made electric cars for a while, and some of their compliance cars early on are actually really good. We're talking about the Kona EV for Hyundai and then the Niro EV for Kia. These are actually similar cars, just slightly different bodies and different brands, but they share a lot of technology. They charge quicker than the Bolt. They have decent range. I think people get 200-ish miles with them, depending on the battery pack. They have been offered with different versions, and the new ones are honestly pretty good. Kyle just looked at a new Kia Niro EV that he was renting, and he was really impressed with it. However, I'm going to politely disagree with Kyle here. He said you should absolutely get for the new one because they have made the facelifted Kia Niro EV and Kona EV for this year because they're both getting a facelift with some technological revisions. They made them a lot nicer. I don't think functionally they've improved them that much. It's kind of a Leaf situation. That said, they're starting from a much better place than Leaf. I think they're still great modern vehicles. The issue is that realistically, barring discounts and maybe depending on demand, we'll see what happens in the next few weeks, but the MSRP that those are listing for is like 40 grand, a little above 40 grand. And if they're actually going for that, or even a little bit less like they would in a normal market, that's great. If there's markups on those, it's really tough because then we're getting to the MSRP of more advanced electric vehicles that are more expensive, like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, the Kia EV6, which start out in the mid to high 40K zone realistically. So if you can get one, if dealers are incentivizing them, do look for Niro EV and Hyundai Kona EV. They're slightly different. For those of you not familiar with either vehicle, the Hyundai Kona is a little bit smaller. It's almost really just a hatchback. They call it a crossover, but it's not really. I mean, it's lifted a bit, but it's honestly like a hatchback. It's really small. My girlfriend has one. She has the Kona gas car because they made a gas hybrid and electric version. She had the gas version. She loves it, and she's been looking at an electric one. The Kia Niro is Kia's take on it. It's a little bit bigger. It is a little bit more crossover shaped. I find a little more boxy in the rear end, which means you practically have a little bit more space. So I think the Kia Niro is the slightly nicer vehicle across generations. Both of them are nice, just depends on your preference and what you can find available. So really new, if you got the budget, $40,000, again, that could get you a base Tesla Model 3. But if you're not interested in Tesla for whatever reason, or you want that different form factor, right? I understand if you don't want a Tesla Model 3, it's a sedan. That's one of the reasons I didn't want it. If you want a hatchback and you don't want a Tesla Model Y, or those are too expensive for you, the Kia Niro EV and the Hyundai Kona EV are really compelling, the EV versions of those. They also do make plug-in hybrid versions for both. I don't have as much experience with those, and we don't talk as much about plug-in hybrids in this channel. We're talking mainly here about full battery electric vehicles. So I think those can both be really compelling options. So consider those. And used, you're looking at a budget of, I would say, between 25 to 30 grand. Okay, I did miss something. Mini Cooper SE exists. When it came on the market, it was eligible for a tax credit. It was actually pretty affordable. It was really compelling, even though it was lower range. It's a Mini Cooper. It's fun. It was front wheel drive, had a lot of power, peppy, nice hatchback. BMW's increased the price in recent years. It's no longer eligible for the tax credit. There is a new redesign on the way, but again, we're not talking about future cars in this video. There's so many future cars. The Chevy Blazer EV might be a compelling, cheap crossover, but it's not out yet. And I don't want to talk about cars that people can't even order yet, let alone, actually have shipped to them, and we don't really know the real prices of yet. So while there's interesting, compelling things, like Volkswagen says it can make a $25,000 EV work, or 25,000 euros, whatever that equates to in dollars at the moment, sounds pretty cheap and great. I want to see it first. So that's my quick little insert back to the main video. I really hope those come under 25 grand. One more thing I want to mention in this video is if you're in a used market and you're looking at any of these used electric cars, be it a Tesla Model 3 or a Model Y, which aren't really reliably coming under 25K yet, but any of these cheap cars, Chevy Bolts on the market, if you're looking at them, do really consider getting them under 25K if possible, if you meet certain income requirements. I'm going to link something here, but new for this year, the IRS has a $4,000 tax rebate for buying a used electric vehicle. It has to be purchased through a dealer. There's some requirements on the exact stuff, but the Kona and the Niro would both qualify, assuming you can get them for under 25 grand. I haven't quite seen them get that low, and that's the reason my girlfriend, Gosha, decided not to go with a Hyundai Kona EV right now. She just can't find a Kona EV that's under 25 grand. No dealer wants to make that bargain. Once they can, I think that will be a big game changer, and I'll make an out-of-spec guide video as like a PSA once that happens. But honestly, so few options, right? It's a shame, and it doesn't have to be this way. If we go over to Europe, our neighbors, right, and especially China, there's way more cheap electric vehicles on their market. That's because, frankly, their market's more comfortable with small cars. American buyers don't like smaller cars. And that, I know, that may not be true for you in the audience. I personally love small cars. I get it if you have a family and need space, you want an SUV or something larger, but so many American buyers only want to look at larger cars and consider them, and then they complain about the cars being expensive and not being particularly efficient. Well, I hate to say you get what you ask for, but you get what you ask for. In Europe, we have vehicles like the Volkswagen ID3 and many variants of it. I think the Cupra Born is a nice sportier version of it. There's all these brands you might not have even heard of in the US selling really cool hatchbacks. The MG4, which is basically MG, is a British brand that's now owned by a Chinese company that operates it very successfully. MG4 is really compelling. It's not sold in the US because Chinese tariffs and other stuff. I won't get into politics here, but it's a shame, basically. In the US, this is a very US central video. I apologize for international viewers, but there's just a challenge. The market doesn't really want smaller cars, so no one's making new, smaller cars. You can still look for, if you're on an absolute shoestring budget and your expectations are realistic, you're not going to go on many road trips or charge quickly, you can get Fiat 500es, the BMW i3, the Volkswagen e-Golf. You can get these cars, or first-gen Nissan Leaf even, for very cheap. And we're looking at like less than 100-mile ranges on many of these, especially with battery degradation. We're looking at not capable charging, but if you just want a second car, your expectations are realistic, and you're going to be in a short radius, and you really want to go electric, those are my kind of last picks and options for you to consider. So hopefully this has been helpful. I wish I had better stuff to say. I mean, cheap electric cars, who doesn't want that? It's tough right now. The market seems to be going up market. Batteries are really expensive. Manufacturers are struggling to turn over a profit, with I guess the exception of Tesla and maybe Volkswagen. But it's so hard for these businesses. It's a matter of scale and all these other things. And I wish they prioritized cheaper EVs more, but they haven't really, with the exception of early on, right, the Chevy Bolt and the still for sale, thank goodness, Hyundai Kona EV and Kia Niro EV. So that's been my advice. If you have other things you might think might be a good used EV buy, please comment. I'll pin any super kind of, relevant comments that mention something I've totally missed here. I think I've covered, unfortunately, the basics of the US market because it's so limited for cheap cars. And also I've been stopped here. Traffic is really bad. I was hoping to have a nice scenic drive on Boulder Canyon, but looks like, I don't know. I hope nothing bad's happened. There's emergency vehicles. So I'll leave you off here, hoping everything's okay. Apologies, you didn't get a scenic drive today, but I think we needed to have this important chat. Thanks so much for watching. I've been Max, and I'll see you in another out of spec guide video.